We'll move on to our next talk, and that is from Dr. Hilary Morris. Hilary is an academic historian, well known to audiences in the UK who have an interest in medical history. She's an apothecaries lecturer at Brighton Medical School and has recently taken up the dual challenges of course convener for the Diploma in History of Medicine at the Society of Apothecaries in London, and as if that were not enough, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Medical Biography. But despite a very busy schedule, she's kindly agreed to address us on Sir William Osler's influence in shaping medical history. So I'll hand over now to Dr. Morris. Thank you, Hilary.
I would like to begin by thanking the British Society for the History of Medicine and the Osler Club of London for extending this invitation to discuss Sir William Osler's influence in shaping modern medical history. There can be no doubt that this is an immense subject, yet surprisingly it is an aspect of his past which has not received the attention it deserves. So in addition to talking about some of the reasons as to why this is the case, I also hope to encourage further discussion on this particular aspect of Osler in the hope that it will facilitate a more balanced understanding of his true legacy in current and future histories of medicine. Let us start with this particular publication. Burnham is a well-known preparatory book which has received favourable reviews and as such can be found on the reading list of many undergraduate courses offering the ever-increasing popular subject of medical history. As with any reader of this type, the contents are organised as a brief introduction, though instead of using a chronological approach, Burnham introduces the reader to key themes which are presented in a way to encourage further engagement with material. What is interesting for me as a medical historian who frequently uses this type of text is that it says much about the current state of medical history. Burnham is certainly representative of the new school, who have constructed a very distinct agenda as opposed to the old traditional format. This means that they increasingly focus on the patient rather than the practitioner, the healthcare system instead of the medical profession, and the needs of society as opposed to the needs of medical training. Consequently, whilst I am sad that at no time does he reference Osler, this comes, sadly, as no surprise. However, what is disappointing for me as a jobbing medical historian is his concluding paragraph. In attempting to promote the subject, he says, "Most fun of all is to look at the old books and journals that provide the main record from which medical history can be written. But all of such original materials from the past of medicine and health should be used with care, as one can be drawn into looking at them, become fascinated, and lose track of time. Many may argue that this is nothing more than a friendly aside, which is in keeping with the general tone of the work. However, I believe that this is dangerously close to requiring students to alienate themselves from the type of in-depth understanding which meaningful medical history requires. Moreover, the material cannot be selective, depending on the favoured trends of the day. Instead, we should remember that excellent scholarship facilitates discussion based on as many perspectives as possible. If this includes new areas, as we are seeing in medical history, then that is excellent. However, it must not exclude past interpretations, even if we find them dated, as they in themselves have a valued role to play, no matter how irrelevant they appear. Sadly, I have to say that this is what is happening to Sir William Osler, despite being one of the greatest supporters of medical history. He is absent not just in Burnham's work, but increasingly is a ghostly and often absent figure in the majority of books now being published with a medical history content. There are exceptions, such as the recent Osler Encyclopedia, to which we owe Charles Bryan an immense vote of thanks. Books such as this are a timely reminder to us all that Osler was one of the greatest influences in the 19th and early 20th century history of medicine, both as an outstanding clinician and academic. With this ability, he also became one of the most important names in medical education. Yet Osler particularly appreciated the value of medical history in the way it provided him with an access into and across these distinct areas in a way which was innovative and relevant. This realization, along with a genuine love for the subject, also meant that it became its most ardent advocate and promoted it at every opportunity. His generosity of commitment was renowned and still retains a tangible presence, not only in the societies and professional bodies which commemorate his memory, but also the world-famous library he created, along with his own personal writing, much of which is still in print today. However, I believe that despite this achievement, it is still important to explain his relevance to new audience. Moreover, what we are seeing in the case of Osler is that whilst his career as a clinician is given due discussion, there is a notable reluctance to give the same credit to his role as a medical historian. Why is this? It is not uncommon to find reference being made to both Osler's style and choice of content as somewhat outdated. There have also been concerns raised in relation to the fact that he was not seen as a professional historian, so has little standing as such. This is a concern which I find very difficult to credit. I am also aware that all too often terms such as professional and amateur are increasingly being used in hidden agendas, especially in today's universities. Surely it is more important to see Osler and what he was capable of in terms of the history he wrote. His own early liberal education gave him a traditional appreciation of the subject, which resonated with the ideals of earlier scholars such as von Ranke. Rankian history today is viewed with mild intellectual curiosity, but it was of immense value at the time, as it gave a definition of the subject which involved not just learning about the past, but also using this knowledge to construct the present for the benefit of future ages. Men such as Osler particularly valued this interpretation, as it gave the subject matter a transferable value and intention, particularly with regards to medicine. At the same time, it is important to remember that medical history already had a defined and accessible historiography, dating back to Sprengel, whose work inspired generations of future academics. They also promoted the subject in universities, not just as a study of the great and the good, but reinforced the ideology that a career in medicine also came with a sense of civic duty. With this type of formative early education, Osler was therefore more than capable to promote medical history as a suitable form of education for fellow staff and students, which he did with great success. His use of a positivist model, which emphasized the unbroken tradition of professionalism, heroic intention, and achievements, may seem outdated today, but this does not mean that it no longer holds any relevance as an aspect of his work which allowed him to achieve so much, as well as inspiring future generations of medical practitioners. My own particular interest is the way in which Osler recognized the value of medical biography. Throughout his own life, he wrote 39 distinct biographies, as well as hundreds of biographical references, which can be found in his other writings. As he explained, to a lifelong interest in biography as a recreation, I have added a strong conviction of its value in education. As the editor of the Journal of Medical Biography, I am reassured that this type of medical history has not been consigned to the list of those styles no longer deemed appropriate. Rather, it has retained a validity and renewed interest, which is based on the way it offers a personal interaction with the material. In my own role, I'm able to share Osler's own appreciation that biography offers one of the most inclusive ways of understanding the vastness of medical history in all its different presentations, or, as he so eloquently explained, how it permits the silent influence of character upon character. With his unquestionable commitment to medical history, it is perhaps fortunate that Osler was spared any personal involvement on events which were eventually to lead to a divergence between the medical schools and the universities when it came to the role of medical history. This became such a catalyst for change and also had an immense implication for not just what was being taught, but how the subject was perceived, that it dominated the way medical history developed throughout the 20th century. To give a brief reminder, medical schools in Europe had long recognised the importance of a historical element in the curriculum. However, the modernisation of this content first appeared in Germany, though the ideology was quickly accepted in places such as the US, where key names such as Sudhoff and Sigerist ensured that students were being presented with a far more relevant curriculum in line with the demands of the modern profession they were training to enter. Sigerist, in particular, famously opposed the more traditional content of great lives and noble achievements on the grounds that it might potentially create an irrelevant academic subject which had no bearing on the reality of the time, and favoured instead the new social ideologies. In the UK, medical students were also being taught by increasingly appropriate staff. The first specific lectureship in the history of medicine was created in Edinburgh University in 1908 and was appointed to the physician turned historian Dr. John Comrie. In England, medical history was established 12 years later at UCL under the guidance of Dr. Charles Singer, whose own medical and academic career was in the early years heavily influenced by none other than Sir William Osler. Despite these very positive advances in medical schools, there was, however, an insurmountable problem appearing from the direction of the universities, who increasingly found it difficult to share a common set of aims relating to the form and function of medical history. This certainly escalated in the years after the Second World War, where there followed a full-scale attack on established learning in the form of postmodernism, led by such influential thinkers as Foucault, who argued that much of what we learn, particularly history, was little more than a fiction, which therefore ought to be dismantled. Whilst many historians were not prepared to accept total academic annihilation, we see instead many taking the opportunity to revisit areas of traditional thought which now seemed irrelevant. Their commitment to challenging the establishment was rewarded with a calibre of academic scholarship, which was from the outset outstanding both in aim and content. For medical history, though, it was not until the 1960s when it discovered a wealth of appropriate areas of research, initially under the umbrella of social history. By widening the definition in ways which had never been done before, historians with no clinical training were now able to claim ownership of the material without concern, as the focus of the subject turned away from the interests of the medical profession and towards those of society in general. In the UK, this demedicalisation of the subject was given further support with the creation of the Wellcome Units, which, as John Pickstone described, soon became major centres of innovation, directed by charismatic radical historians with a strong sense of intellectual purpose. With their close affiliation to universities, this soon led to history departments recognizing the validity of teaching the new medical history with very little need to retain an affiliation with medical schools. Most medical history was being written by non-clinicians. A wealth of expertise who have subsequently ensured that the subject is no longer regarded as an odd offshoot of history, but it is now classified as a major school of thought with its own rapidly growing historiography. But what of the situation in medical schools? Here, medical history effectively faded into the background until the situation was saved in 1993 with the publication of Tomorrow's Doctors. This review recognised the importance of offering students a broad and balanced. It was also understood that this approach did much to elevate medical training up to medical education, something which Osler had understood throughout most of his own career. Today, medical schools offer SSCs, research projects, and the opportunity to intercalate in many areas of medical history, and students will uphold that they find this beneficial to their overall training. To support these initiatives, there were a wealth of texts which show the value of medical history, and still are, though many are still being written by non-clinicians. Of course, there are exceptions to this, and many of those are attending meetings such as this today. I will also argue that history of any element of healthcare is not complete unless it includes the representative voice of all concerned parties. This is the debate which has to be had. To put it another way, Charles Bryan has usefully named in his encyclopedia Paul Teagan, Elizabeth Fee, and Theodore Brown as three medical historians who have discussed Osler in terms of his contribution to the history and historiography of the history of medicine. However, I would like to question, why only three? Medical history is one of the most dynamic subjects of the day. Unlike many other histories, it is a subject which holds a unique reference to so many of those who study it. This is something which was recognised by Sir William Osler, and which he shared with a generosity which is unlikely to ever be matched. Therefore, it is important that he is not simply relegated to being just another great name. His inspiration, achievements, aspirations deserve a better legacy than we see in current medical history. I will finish by referring to a book which many have read, namely Roy Porter's Greatest Benefit. This is a famous work of Porter, and in it he makes 13 references to Osler, but all of them relate to his clinical achievements. At no point does he discuss Osler's role as a founding father of modern medical history. Furthermore, for a book which often mirrors the aim and content of ways which Osler himself promoted, it is an incomplete discussion of such a significant supporter of our subject and deserves better treatment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hilary. That was wonderful.